You have now arrived at your destination.
Kevin, this is such a joy to do. I've wanted to do this one for a while. I've heard so many good things, largely from a slightly biased person being your wonderful wife, Elizabeth. But thank you so much for joining me today, Kevin.
Thank you so much for having me.
Not at all. I'm excited for this, but I want to start. And we see this kind of incredible, illustrious career. We've got Instagram, we've got Twitter, we've got Planet most recently. So, how did you make your way into the world of startups and to lead some of the most powerful product orgs as you have done?
So completely unintentionally is the answer. It's funny. I was at Harvard when Zuck was at Harvard. So I'm a year older than him. And I went through school planning I wanted to be a math professor or a physics professor. I was just like, total tunnel vision on math and physics and science. Zuck, after I think a year or two or something, dropped out and went to Palo Alto to do Facebook full time. And I remember thinking, after Facebook had just taken over the campus, right? You remember back then it was taking over every college campus one by one. And I remember thinking, he's going to drop out of a Harvard education to go do some company? What an idiot. And like, so I just had no conception, right? And then, so I came out to the Bay Area to continue a physics degree and ended up meeting my now wife, Elizabeth, and she opened my eyes to the fact that we were just surrounded by all these startups doing amazing things. And at some point in there, I finally was like, wait a minute, I'm doing, theoretical physics. If I'm lucky, I'll make an impact on physics in like 40 years, if I'm lucky. And I could go write code and like ship something at one of these companies, tomorrow to 1 million people. I want to go do that. And so, really, thanks to her, and if we talk about my career, we'll realize that almost all of my opportunities came from Elizabeth. I really just ride her coattails. But that's how I got started. I hopped out of my PhD. I dropped out and started working at startups as an engineer. Ended up at Twitter in the early days when it was about 40 people. Got really lucky. People took some bets on me that they really had no business taking. And I worked hard, tried to make those bets real. Ended up leading product at Twitter after about 7 years. Went to Instagram to lead product. Now at Planet. So it's been a wild ride. It has absolutely not been premeditated.
Well, I mean, there's many things I love there. One, Zuck, you dropped out, what an idiot. And two, I did actually hear that, your jobs are all thanks to Elizabeth. So don't worry, it was someone else who told me that as well. It was validated by a third party.
Well, it couldn't possibly be Elizabeth, could it?
It couldn't possibly. No idea what you're talking about. But I did speak to another third party. We mentioned Instagram there as part of the journey. I was intrigued. I spoke to James Everingham, and he told me that Instagram is one of the best product thinking organizations he's ever seen. And I thought, that's interesting. What do you think, Kevin, makes Instagram this way specifically? And I guess what are one or two of your biggest takeaways from leading product at Instagram?
So when I was leaving Twitter after about 7 years there, it wasn't the first company I'd ever been at, but it was the first company I'd ever been at where it was at all successful and I had any degree of responsibility. And somebody I considered a mentor told me, you've been at Twitter for 7 years now. You don't know the difference between the way Twitter does something and the right way to do something. And they're not always different, but they're not always the same. And like the important thing is being able to tell them apart versus just knowing one way to do something. And so this person was like, you need to go somewhere else. You need to learn different ways of doing things so that you get an appreciation for all of that. And it was so right. So I give Kevin Systrom and Mike Krieger, the two Instagram founders, just a ton of credit for the way Instagram works and how product focused it was. I'd say a couple things stand out from working with Kevin. Number one, he's the best editor I've ever seen. He spent a ton of time just like distilling things down, taking an idea, sanding off all of the rough edges, thinking about how something new should integrate into Instagram's product, and not stopping until it was so beautifully integrated it felt like it was always a part of Instagram. You can just like, if you think back to the Instagram of 2018, you could feel that every single detail was designed, even when, new formats that made big changes to the product like stories came in. And then the other big thing that I learned from Kevin is that conviction and decision making really matters. So like we were very hypothesis driven at Instagram. We were always focused on the problem we were solving and like the why behind it. The worst thing you could possibly do is go to Kevin Systrom and say, "Hey, I had an idea. Wouldn't it be cool if?" And he would come back and he would say, "No, it would not be cool if. What problem are you solving? Who are you solving it for?" So there's this whole like fascinating backstory to the development of IG Stories, which is probably for a different podcast. But as we were developing it and going through, Kevin said to the entire team, "Whatever we build here, this is going to go at the top of Instagram's main tab. That's final. That's a decision. I know it's a risk, but making the move to Instagram Stories, making the move from an Instagram where people only put their most perfect, curated stuff to a world where they feel comfortable sharing their like funny, silly daily moments, that's existential for us. We know it's solving a main problem for users. And if we don't get it right on this first iteration, we're going to roll forward. We're not rolling it back. So it's going to go front and center on the main tab. This is the bet we're making. Now let's go build the best product we can."
Kevin, sorry, I have to dive in here. Sorry, you mentioned conviction and decision making, and then stories and the backdrop of stories. From the outside, and maybe this is naive, it looked like a reactive move from towards Snapchat's obviously stories, which were phenomenally successful. Is that true? If so, is that kind of conviction and decision making because it's a reactive move based on a competitor? And what's the backstory there? I'm intrigued. You mentioned it.
Yeah, when we launched Stories, the number one thing we made sure to say was like, kudos to Snapchat. You invented this format. Like you found, you highlighted a new way that people want to share, and they clearly want to share this way. And it just showed that Instagram didn't have that way of sharing. Instagram had become really pressurized, right? Like if you met a new person, you'd go to their Instagram profile to see what they were like and who they were. And that meant that like anything you posted to Instagram, you were like, is this how I want to represent myself forever? Yeah. And you get more followers and all of a sudden like you're like, well, my last post got 100 likes. Is this one going to get 100 likes? Maybe it's not. Maybe this isn't good enough to post on Instagram. It was just slowly becoming more pressurized, and Snapchat helped us realize it. And so for sure, in that sense, it was a reaction to seeing that like people really wanted to share this way. But I think if you had just taken Stories and like plopped it in the middle of Instagram, it wouldn't have worked. And you've seen this as lots of other things, lots of other products have launched Stories and they haven't worked. So there was a real dissection of what made Stories work, and then how exactly they should fit into Instagram and play with other parts of Instagram, that I think was actually what made it successful.
What were they? What did Instagram do with Stories to make it successful in a way that others weren't able to?
So there were three things, and let me see if I can remember them all because it's been a few years, but there were three things that we that were sort of key to Instagram that we just needed to flip on its head with Stories. So one was the permanence, right? When you posted on Instagram, it was permanent. And that meant you really had to think about, does this represent me and who I am? Second was you got public feedback. So you got 100 likes on your last post. Are you going to get 100 likes on this post? Like, if you don't, all of your friends are going to see that it wasn't as popular. So like there's this public feedback that creates pressure. And then third, it was a push model. So if you posted a bunch of times a day, you'd show up in your friends' feeds a bunch of times a day, whether or not they wanted to see all of your posts. And so, you kind of, it felt a little thirsty for you to post a lot per day. So you'd restrict yourself. You would only post like your best stuff. Yeah. And so Stories basically flipped that. It went from permanent to ephemeral. It went from public feedback to private feedback. And it went from a push model to a pull model, right? You click on my story, you decide you want to see it, and then you see it. And so I can feel comfortable posting 19 things to my story because unless you care, you're not going to look, right? And so Stories basically flipped all of those on their heads. And that was, as we understood that better, we were like, oh, that's how the pressure goes away. And then it was a matter of figuring out how to integrate it into Instagram in a way that felt great. So integrating it with DMs and all sorts of other aspects of the product.
I mean, I've never slid into anyone's DMs, so I wouldn't know what you're talking about. Moving
but it was just it was such a lesson. Just to wrap that up, it was such a lesson because Kevin was just like, this is going at the top of the product, and it's going to become central to Instagram, and we're going to figure it out. And if and because it did, it created network effects because everyone saw it, people started using it, and then when you saw your friends using it, then you would try it. If instead we'd done the timid thing and put it like in the back of a third tab and like, well, if people find it, we'll do a 1% experiment and maybe it'll work. Like it never would have taken off. And so it was like the boldness, the decisiveness. I learned a ton from that.
Can I ask, does that work when you're testing new products? And what I mean by that is with the boldness and decisiveness, it goes against the gradual release, iteration, testing in Australia and Sweden with new markets. It's a real clarity of conviction. Here you are, bold on my home screen, versus slowly getting enough data to know if it works.
Well, so this is one of my personal product beliefs. Testing doesn't mean timidity. You can always use the fact that you're testing something and you can run an A/B test to test something 99% and have a 1% holdback. You don't have to test 1% in Australia, right? Testing gives you data. You can, if you believe in what you're doing, you can test by rolling it out to 99%. You can also test something aggressive, like putting stories at the front of and at the top of the user experience. And you can test that in Australia, but you don't have to test something on the third tab, underneath the scroll. You can still test something really ambitious. So testing is a way to understand what you're building and how it's working for people. And that's orthogonal to whether what you're testing is bold or not.
Kevin, how do you know when to listen to users? You've worked on Twitter, you've worked on Instagram, you've worked on some of the most loved consumer products. When you make any changes, 99% of people say, I hate it, because they like just what they knew before and they're used to it. How do you know when to listen versus when to stick to the product strategy you have?
I don't think there's a science to it, to be honest. It's funny when I introduce myself now to people, like when I'm trying to make sure that they feel comfortable giving me feedback, I tell people, look, I'm really hard to offend. I want feedback. Trust me. I was head of product at Twitter. I built a product that was the world's best amplifier for people to tell us how bad we were at building product. I'm really tough to offend now. But I think I always, despite having, it's really important to have lots of data because data tells you important things. There's no excuse for not knowing data. But I actually really think anecdotal feedback is valuable because a lot of times the anecdotes can get lost in the data itself, especially when you're talking about a service that has hundreds of millions of users. I always find anecdotes, especially the ones where you're like, oh yeah, I've been kind of feeling the same thing. Those play an important role. They make you ask questions, and ultimately it's asking questions and developing hypotheses that lead you to better products.
Can I ask a weird one, and totally off schedule, but I love this. What makes a good anecdote versus a bad anecdote? And when you're training product teams today, how do you advise them on what good customer discovery is? What are good questions versus not good questions to ask?
Well, you have to go in. You can't go in with a hypothesis that you are trying to validate, like that you just want to see true, and so you ask leading questions. This is obvious, but people do it. So I think it's a lot of it's the old was it Henry Ford or somebody is like, if you ask customers what they want, they'll tell you they want faster horses. What you need to do is do a good job getting underneath that question. What they actually want to do is get to where they're going faster. So you hear what they say, but you really focus on what's underneath what they're saying, and that's the way you do good product discovery.
I totally get you. Can I ask, we mentioned stories being a massive success. If we think about mistakes and your time back at Instagram, what was the biggest product mistake that you made? And what were your lessons and learnings from that experience?
So the most immediate one, actually, when I think about mistakes, maybe more of a leadership mistake. I mean, there've been a number of failed product launches that we could talk about, but one of the biggest leadership mistakes I think I've made is not being decisive enough. When I stepped into the leadership role at Twitter, so I spent 7 years at Twitter, kind of growing from IC engineer to ICPM to manager to director to VP to SVP, and at some point, most of that was leading ads products and on the revenue side, and then my last, I don't know, year and a half or something, I was leading all of the product, including the consumer products, and it was new for me. And we had all these amazing people on the team that had been working on consumer products for a long time. Frankly, half these people, I was like, man, I should be working for you. You shouldn't be working for me. And I was kind of intimidated. And there were 10 different directions that people's opinions on where they thought Twitter should go. And I wasn't decisive enough. I came in, I listened to everybody. Everyone had different thoughts. And when we didn't agree, we kind of like agreed to meet next week and talk more about it. And one of the things I learned, and it was such a stark contrast going to Instagram to the earlier part of the conversation, was like, you know what? It's actually better. Make a decision, launch something, realize that you got it wrong, fix it, and launch the better version. And you're going to do that faster than if you just sat and like talked in a circle for 3 months about theoretical things. So just make decisions, go, and then fix it. And you're going to work faster, and you're going to end up with a better product.
Can I ask, the challenge that you have is you are a product leader and you need to make decisions. And there is the edit button. There is also Twitter Spaces. There is also, you name your many different directions you can go in. How do you determine product prioritization and the decisions to make and focus on versus those to put on the back burner for next quarter?
I think the number one thing is you've got to have a strategy. And I haven't been at Twitter for years now, so I'll leave Twitter's particular strategy to it and the people that are there. But I think you have to have a plan that can come in any form. It doesn't, I'm not a big subscriber to it has to be this way or it has to be that way. It can be, a 6-page doc that just lays out, here's the direction we're going and here's why. And that gives the team a litmus test. It gives you a way to understand for any particular thing, is this part of our strategy or is it not? And if it is, maybe it's not worth debating exactly, should we do this now or should we do it later? This person wants to, just go. If it's aligned with the strategy, just go. And if it's not in line with the strategy, then that closes off that discussion. Whereas if you don't have a strategy, or if you think you do, but people don't really understand it, then there's no quick way to understand whether there's something you want to build is in the right direction or not. And it leads to lots of one-off, should we do this or should we not kind of decisions. So having a good strategy in place, it not only helps you make decisions, it empowers the people on the teams to make decisions on their own, which makes the whole organization run faster.
This is so unfair because we had this schedule and I'm just enjoying it so much that I'm just freewheeling entirely. But the sun's out, and so I'm going to take liberty and do so. You work with many startups today with Scribble. When we think about product strategy, are there consistencies in the mistakes that you see startups make with regards to how they approach product strategy in the first 1 to 2 years?
Yeah, I mean, the first 1 to 2 years are totally different, right? Like you invest in the early stages in companies and they're going to pivot 3 times before they find anything. So laying out a strategy and sticking to something, it assumes that you have some degree of product market fit. I think when you're a small company, you have a belief. There's some reason, there's some deep-seated problem that you're trying to solve. Otherwise, you wouldn't have gone through all the pain that's involved in like starting a company and going through the early stages. So I think you stay true to what that core belief is, but be flexible on how you get there. And that in the early stages, that may mean making much bigger pivots than a later stage company will make. And that's okay. But there's some driving reason why you started the company, and I think it's important to keep that.
I totally agree with keeping that. I do want to ask, and kind of going back to kind of leadership lessons, sorry, because it took us in very vehement directions. I spoke to many of your teams before, and again, I spoke to James, and he told me that specifically you excel at comms across scaling teams. We spoke a little bit about your time at Instagram and Twitter, obviously both sizable teams by the time you were leading them. What does it take to be great at communications as a product leader for you?
One thing that I've been slow to realize, but as I think as I've come into it, it's helped me, is it's really important to be clear about a small number of things. Extremely clear about a small number of things that really matter. It's tempting every time, like if you're out speaking to your company a lot, it's tempting every week to get up there and say new things. You feel like you said the previous thing before, and so it's time to say something new this time, or keep them engaged and show that you're having original thoughts and all of that. And in actuality, especially as your organization grows, it's really important to just say the same things over and over again. And so you got to make sure that those are the right things, that you're sticking to the points that really fundamentally matter, that you want to drive into everyone's heads. And then you say them over and over. And the 12th time you've said something, when you're like, these people can't possibly want to hear me say this again, they must be so bored. That's when it's starting to finally kind of like get into their heads, and they're not just hearing it from you. They're actually thinking of it as their own set of ideas. They're starting to be able to develop litmus tests on their own to decide. They're starting to repeat your words back to you in other conversations. Like that's when it starts to stick. And that's when you start to get alignment, and alignment creates confidence in the organization. It creates speed. But I still have to check myself. I'm like, I want to say new things. I have other ideas, but like, no, say the things that really matter and say them over and over again.
Can I ask, what forums do you find the best and worked well for you, and what didn't? If you think we have, posts, we have messaging, we have in-person meeting, virtual meeting, there's so many different ways that we can imbue that single core message that we want to imbue. What worked for you and what didn't in terms of the forms?
So I like finding, well, I guess in general, I write to think. And so for me, I try and having a written version of what I'm speaking through, what I'm thinking is really important. I find slides can, you can get away with not completing your thoughts when you're speaking in bullets. Whereas if you're going to try and write something down on paper, it's going to force you to think all the way through it and like have a narrative all the way through. So I always start there. I think the other key thing, though, is having some sort of regular forum. So that can be a weekly all hands. It can be, with Planet, I write a note to the company every Monday, just sort of my top 3 things that I'm thinking about. And it's an opportunity, again, to like reinforce the things that are most important. But you want some consistent forum, because otherwise you're going to get busy and not do it. And then you're only going to do it when something's actually going wrong, or when you need to, like, and then it's going to feel sudden, and people are going to be like, wait, why is he writing why is he talking to the whole company now? So you want this consistent forum where you can reiterate what matters, and you can turn on the blinker for people to things that are, coming down the line that you want them to begin thinking about. So you can introduce change sort of gradually and in a steady way. So anyways, I find having a regular forum is really important.
I also find like a cadence that you'll be able to stick to. I find some people go, I'm going to do it weekly, and then very quickly they can't do it weekly because they don't have the time, whatever. And then suddenly they're like, well, it didn't work, I'm stopping. And it's like, if you just start monthly and always do it, you can move to fortnightly, and that's great. But set a cadence you'll stick to. So I totally agree there. In terms of comms and messaging internally, in terms of scaling teams with that, where are the first places where comms, messaging, and this process breaks down with scale?
I think scaling is interesting because it's sort of it's fractal in some way. Like you can talk about scaling a whole company, or you can talk about scaling a small part of the team. I think one of the biggest challenges that come are when you have one team. Again, whether it's a single team at your whole company because you're like 8 people and you have a 5-person engineering team, and suddenly you have a 10-person engineering team and you're doing 2 things at once. Or whether you're a big company and this is one org splitting into 2 business units or something. But it's when you've had one team and suddenly you have 2, and you're trying to do 2 things at once. You have to coordinate with people who aren't on your direct team. And if you're not careful, you can develop tribalism. People can start using words like us and them. And as you do this, it's really important to keep communication open, to keep everyone focused on the mission, right? Not like your local team, but the mission. Why are you there? It's bigger than either of the 2 teams alone. And to keep using the word we, right? It's all we. Nobody cares about the divisions between your teams. What matters is, are you achieving your mission? And so, but that split is really important, and it happens at every level of a company.
Matt, I'm fascinated. Speaking of like us, we, kind of the tribalism that can ensue with Twitter, you have the Twitter monetization engine with ads and the need to monetize and be a successful kind of profitable company, with also the product purity that the product and engineering teams have. How do you think about, as a product leader, balancing the mindset of revenue generation today with also the awareness of beautiful user experience, beautiful product, and having both those mindsets held at the same time?
Well, I don't think that that they're different, or they have to be different. We one of the things that I'm proud of from Twitter is we pioneered the idea of having ads inside a feed. If you remember back to 2009, 2010, all your ads on a desktop were over on the right-hand side, and they were all horrible, right? It's just a terrible experience. And interestingly, at Twitter, we kind of had no choice because Twitter was almost entirely mobile. There was a desktop experience, but it was, some small fraction of our usage. Twitter was all mobile, and there's no side on a mobile device. And so the only place, if we were going to try and make money, and you got to make money in some way, otherwise there's no Twitter in the future, was to put the ads in the feed. And if you're going to put them in the feed, they should feel like tweets. And wait, if they feel like tweets, what if they just were tweets? And what if the advertising medium felt like a part of the user experience? These are all things that make sense today because a lot of products have adopted them. But at the time, they were kind of crazy. And we had no idea if they were going to work. But it was certainly an attempt to build an advertising product, a way for the company to make money that felt natural to the way people use the product. And we hoped one that would actually get ads, businesses to engage with their customers in their advertising versus this very sort of separated thing that you get if you're watching like a TV ad. So anyways, I don't think they have to be separate. Obviously done poorly they are, but you can try and integrate the two in a natural way.
I totally see that in terms of the integration. In terms of the 7 years at Twitter, I kind of jumped over it, but I do want to touch on it. What were some of the biggest takeaways for you from leading the product there in the final 18 months, but also the kind of 5.5 years before scaling the org? What were some of the biggest takeaways for you, and how did it shape the mindset?
Well, so I think one was really, when I look back at my time at Twitter, it's a lesson in humility, because and this is true in a lot of dimensions, but I'll pick one. In the early days, we thought of Twitter, and like this is kind of true of social media in general, as this unalloyed good, right? And in the winter of 2010, 2011, for example, you had the Arab Spring happening. You had people in Tahrir Square speaking truth to power and using Twitter to give a voice to protests, to engage in democracy. I mean, actually, there was this crazy story where this is back in the day when you had to take downtime to upgrade services, right? You remember sites would be like, we're going to be down for 3 hours because we're upgrading our database or whatever. And so we had to do that. And we had posted in advance, we're going to take the service down for a few hours. We were doing it in the middle of the night because that was as far off peak as we could go. And someone from the State Department reached out, and this is a public story, so I'm not saying anything that can't be said. Someone from the State Department reached out and said, wait, you can't go down at 2 a.m. Pacific. That's the middle of the day in Egypt, and this is Twitter's a really important tool that protesters are using on a daily basis. They need Twitter. You can't go down at this time. And we were like, holy cow. Like that's, it just gives you this sense of the impact that a service like this is having on the world, that the State Department reaches out and tells you when you're allowed to take downtime. So we actually did. We changed it. We went down in the middle of the day Pacific time, middle of the night in the Middle East. And anyway, so we had this sense of Twitter. We used to speak of it as the free speech wing of the free speech party. And we thought of this as this unallied good. And now 10 years later, we've learned a lot, right? Like, you've seen also the ways that people weaponize free speech. They take free speech absolutism and turn it into misinformation and bullying and many worse things. And I say that not to get into a free speech discussion here, but only to say that I learned humility from watching this and watching it play out. Like, Twitter and social in general is as complex and subtle as human social interactions are. And the only thing I know for sure is that anyone who says that, like, oh, the answers are easy, hasn't thought about it hard enough or hasn't been close to it. So I think that's true in a lot of different things. And that's why I say I learned a lot of humility from growing up at Twitter.
I maybe have a rather naive view of this, but I've got rather a strong view, which is like the world is what you make of it, and Twitter is the same. And so if you go on my Twitter feed, it's very fitness oriented, it's very cooking recipe oriented, and that's pretty much it. There's no reality TV series. There's no like models that inspire anorexia. It's actually a very fulfilling and wholesome feed because that's what I've crafted. You craft your own feed. And
Yeah.
actually the ads are then tailored to it. Most of my ads are for cooking knives. Well, great. Fine. That's okay. So I just get a great experience. I think the demonization of social is actually really quite unfair because it's what you make of it. But I have strong views in that one.
If the whole world were as wholesome as Harry Stebbings, it would be a different place.
It would be a very different place. Maybe not a great place, but I want to talk about a couple of other elements. Catherine Porter, wonderful discussion with Catherine Porter. And she asked, in terms of your leadership, she was like, you need to go broad. He's such a fantastic talent. You need to go broad, Harry. I said, okay, let's do this. She asked, what are your single biggest leadership lessons? She obviously works with you at Meta. What would you say yours are in response?
Yeah, Catherine is such an incredible leader. The number one thing is it's all about the team. Hire people better than you, set directions, support them, have their backs, give them room to run. But that's basically the entire game. If you surround yourself by people that are better than you give them clear direction, you empower them, then almost in all cases, good things are going to happen.
What are the biggest hiring mistakes you've made?
Oh, I mean, I don't know. I try not to dwell too much on hiring mistakes. I mean, I'm certainly not going to name anybody here, but like generally, hiring mistakes, you make them because people are complex and you get a limited amount of time to interview, and so you don't always get to know the full person in your interview. So you're going to make mistakes that way. And also, one thing I've learned is it's really sort of situation dependent. You can have a person who's an amazing leader in one place, and it just doesn't work out, and for whatever reason in this a particular environment. And when it doesn't work out, it doesn't mean that they're not good. It just means it wasn't a match, and they can go off and do amazing things somewhere else. So it's also why I've learned not to take too much of a not to build too strong of an opinion when you see somebody was let go or somebody was fired from somewhere. Sometimes it means that they weren't they don't have the right skills, but just as often it means that they weren't in the right environment for them and they'll go thrive in another location.
Do you agree that certain people are meant for certain stages of a company development? Often people say, they're a great 0 to 1, but they're not, hypergrowth or whatever. They're very operator led, but they're not crafts people. Do you agree that people are destined for stages?
I don't know about destined. I agree that people's mindsets are definitely right for different things. Some people thrive in ambiguity. They want you to give them a blank space and say, go figure this thing out. And other people would have no idea where to start if you did that to them. But if you give them something that's kind of working and you say, make this thing twice as efficient, or go perfect this thing, go find the edges, go find what's not right and make it better, then they're perfectly at home and are going to do amazing work that would stupefy the people that want a blank space, right? The people that want a blank space are like, I don't want to just mess around with the edges. Give me another blank space. So I think you can learn those mindsets, and I think it's not destiny, but I do think people are best in different situations.
When doing references, do you have any favorite questions which help you unpack the weaknesses of someone? So like mine that actually Danny Herzberg at Sequoia taught me is, if you were to hire someone beneath Kevin, what would they be brilliant at? Because most often they will lead with, they'd be really organized because Kevin's not organized, or what. I'm not saying that at all, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Do you have any that help you really get to the crux of weaknesses?
So yeah, I like to. A friend of mine, actually, a person I worked with at Instagram, this guy Mike DeVellin, who led analytics, had this theory that's really resonated with me. That you want alternating skills, just like you were saying. You want alternating skills, and he kind of classified people into are they kind of I'm trying to remember the word he used. I don't remember. He had a provocative word for it, but basically, are they the kind of person that they're gonna instigate things and they're gonna break some eggs and cause some trouble, or are they like a politician, and not in the bad sense of the word, but a politician who's going to kind of smooth things over and make everyone work together well. And his theory was you want these sort of alternating rows of politicians and like instigators. Um, and if you have that, you can actually be incredibly effective. And so I try and sometimes set that up and then ask people, ask which is this person and why, and what would their colleagues say about them. I think that's kind of the other trick is people are hesitant to say themselves necessarily to say something, constructive or negative about a person. But if you say like, what do their peers say about them? Everyone can say, oh, their peers say. So try and poke around that way and get insight.
Can I ask a bit of a weird one? But I've interviewed now some of the best product leaders in the world, and a concerning trait that I've seen is there's more and more process-driven, kind of bureaucratic product leaders that are operators and like to instill processes and more legislation and more like red tape. And there's very little product innovation. There's very little craftsmanship. There's very little true leadership. It's much more, I'm a pre-IPO or post-IPO company, and I am the grown-up product operator. And then I compare it to the best that I'm friends with, like Belsky or like Tony Fadell, and they're still like the kids in the playground with product. Like brilliant minds, free, creative, visionary, but also hand on the tiller still. I'm not saying not. But like, do you share my concern around this rise of the kind of product operator leader and their actually ever increasing dominance in orgs?
I do. I think you can. I think it's tempting to over process something and also to kind of over control things. And I say this knowing that one of my weaknesses is I probably bring process in a little bit too late. I appreciate it, but I would rather make the error of having a little bit less process than having a little bit too much. So I think it starts with your strategy. If you have a bold strategy, if you can lay out an ambitious direction for the company, and then you have great people around you who can take that and sort of make it their own, and you leave them the room to go and do that, then I think you're going to get ambitious, bold work happening from your teams. Whereas if you feel a need to control it and kind of lock things down and have people operate within, their particular silos, then, you're going to, if that's what you reward, then that's the kind of work you're going to get. So I think there's a huge amount of benefit in like laying out a bold direction, hiring great people, and letting them go at it.
I totally get you. I think that's right. I do want to move into a very important chapter, though, of your life, which is obviously Scribble. If we start on Scribble, I'm really fascinated. You are a product OG, Kevin. You're too humble to admit it, but you're a product OG. And when you think about investing today with Elizabeth and with Scribble, you have founder, you have market, and you have product. Really the three things, if it's post-product. As a product person, how do you prioritize the three? And what takes centrality to you?
Founder, for sure. No question. And this is early stage investing, right? Scribble is a pre-seed, seed fund. So at the early stages, to me, it's almost all founder because market will change. The product will definitely change. And to me, it's more, are they ambitious? Are they clear-eyed? Do they believe in themselves and what they're doing? And, sure, if they're going after a tiny market somewhere that doesn't make sense and they're totally, that's all they want to do, then maybe it's not the right investment. But in most cases, it's all about the founder.
I get you. I have one learning recently, which is I lost money on a deal. And it's because there were negative externalities associated with the market that could render the company bust, essentially. And now I take market first. Market is the single most important thing. If there are externalities that can kill a company that you can't control, no matter how good the founder is, it's not going to work. And actually, when you think about like pivots, I know Twitter was a pivot from podcasting, obviously, to social network, but they're all in the realm of the same sector. They're all in the realm of a recruitment marketplace, a customer success solution. And so I'm like, actually, I've got to like the narrative direction of where this is going. It's like the wave will change, but the tide is still the same. Do you know what I mean? Do you agree with that, or are you still like, nah?
Like I said, I think you have to have a market that makes sense, but it's less that I focus less on if the market is big, if the opportunity is there, if they're not going after like a subsegment of a subsegment, then I think great founders are going to figure it out. And it's also the case, I always remind people of this because at Planet, in my day job, we're kind of building a new market. And if you look at the size of that market today, it's big, but I think it's going to be 10x as big in the future. And when like Salesforce went public, let alone when Salesforce started, but when Salesforce went public, you can go look at analysts saying, yeah, the SaaS market, it's at least a $10 billion market. And I mean, now think of the SaaS market. I don't know how many trillions it is, right? So these things also grow when you find the right product.
I totally get you, and I agree with that. Do you guys do market sizing analysis? Do you do outcome scenario plans? I find them useless because, like you said, you have Gartner giving you numbers, and it's just bullshit to me. Do you do them?
So our litmus test is, what do you have to believe for this company to be 100x their current size or current valuation? And if if it's sort of like, well, you have to believe that this one thing goes really well, then you can build a good story around it. If instead you're like, well, this has to work, and then at the same time, this market has to open up over here, and then if this competitor doesn't do that, like when you start stacking beliefs, that's when we start getting a little nervous, when 5 things have to all work. But if it's really like there's this one core thing, and then you can see a real path to being 100x, that's kind of what we look at.
No, I totally get you. I call it multi-dependency risk, which is like where you need those multiple different things to all come together. It's interesting. We spoke before, and you said that actually, because you mentioned obviously your day job with Planet there, you said that being an investor made you a better operator. I was intrigued. In what ways did it improve your operating mindset specifically?
A few ways. So, I mean, one is just realizing that there is no one single way to succeed, right? When you read the biographies of successful companies or founders or whatever, it's always like you get this story that, well, they did this, and obviously the step was this, and then obviously it was this, and it was just this single path that was like clear from the beginning. And it's never like that. It's full of twists and turns, unexpected changes and pivots and everything. And so much of it is remaining sort of open to listening to those things, and then having just the raw determination to drive through when things are hard. And you work with a lot of different companies, and you see that play out in so many different ways. And it's just, when you work at a company, I've worked at, I don't know, 5 companies maybe my whole life. So I've seen 5 different things and only 3 that really had any scale. And getting to work with founders, we've invested in, I think over 100 companies, Elizabeth and I, over the course of the years. And you see, so now I've seen 100 other stories, and it's so helpful.
Do you know what's interesting? It's the same with investing, though, I find. If you listen, and one thing I've learned from doing the show, there's no right way to invest. And that's
Right.
what I always say to people starting. It's like, just find the thing that you are singly best at in the world, or best at for you, and just do that as the investor. But don't try and be the analytical investor, the thesis-driven investor. Be you. Do you know what I mean?
Totally. Leadership's the same way, right? If you look at somebody who you think is a great leader, but who's sort of a different person to you, I mean, I couldn't lead the way Steve Jobs leads. It would kill me to act like that to people. And Steve Jobs has done amazing things, and you can't, and in the same way, you can look at like what Ron Conway's done and what Benchmark has done. They've both been massively successful, and their investing philosophies could not be more different. So there's no one way to do things. You find your own way.
What did you believe about company building that you now no longer believe due to your experience investing? Obviously, when you are operating, you learn things that you no longer believe, but like specifically that you've seen investing that you're like renders previous beliefs false or wrong or different compared to operational times.
I think it really is that there's no one way to do it, and it just repeats every time you see a company and a founder do something a massively different way. And it's also it's the mission. The mission matters so much to people. This is something that, maybe I'm biased because this is a lot of how I choose where I spend my time. I want to work on a mission that matters in the world, and something that when I'm 80 years old and I've got, grandkids on my knee, that I'm going to be proud to say that I played a role in. But startups are really hard. It takes a ton of determination. You have to believe when there's no real logic to believing sometimes. And a lot of that to me is the mission. If you're there because of the mission, and you're going through hard times, and in the middle of the darkest hour, you can kind of look up and go, okay, can we still achieve that mission? the reason that I came, can we still achieve that? All right, we can. Then it gives you strength to sort of buckle down and fight through the bad times and come out the other end. Whereas if you're there for other reasons, maybe you don't do that. So mission to me matters so much, and we see that play out in our best companies as well.
You know what it is also for me is like just through seeing so many companies, it's clarity of communication. I don't know if you find this, but like how many companies can succinctly put on a billboard in less than 10 words exactly what they do? Very, very few. And when you say to a founder, if you had a billboard in Times Square, what would you put on it? Less than 10 words. Very few go, this. It astounds me.
And I think that it goes back to some of what we were talking about before, because if you can't do that, then you probably can't impart it to your employees either.
Yeah.
And if you can't impart it to your employees, then they don't have the sense of who you are and what you're doing that motivates you. And if they don't have it, then in hard times, they're not going to be able to fall back on the mission in the same way. And so I really think that there's a way that cascades through the organization if you do it well. It's not just about putting it on a billboard. It means you can also put it in everyone's heads in a way that's really powerful.
You mentioned 100 investments there. When you think back through the 100 investments, what was the biggest hit for you so far? And how did that change your mindset?
I mean, we've been lucky. We've had we've got a number of companies that are doing really well. Like Whatnot, for example, is doing fantastically well, reimagining live commerce. I think a lot of it is. So you have to get kind of lucky to make a good investment, let's be honest. At least I think you have to get lucky. Maybe people are just way better at it than I am. But then you see it's those same kinds of properties come through. So it's not just did you have a great idea, but then it's can you build a great team around you and begin to scale it? Can you help the entire team understand the mission? Can you lay out a good strategy and then delegate responsibility so that you're getting great ideas from all 100 people on your team and not just relying on the founder after some point at scaling? So it's both, do you get like the lightning in the bottle of having this initial thing that finds product market fit, but then can you scale a company around yourself? And the ones that can do both are the ones that become really big companies.
Do you worry that you're too nice? What I mean by that is, as an operator, you naturally are like the founder's best friend all the way, all the way, all the way. And this idea that VCs and founders are always aligned is complete crap. You are an amazing founder. You're like, I want to bring in these amazing angels. Kevin, I want a bigger check in your round. I want $1 million, not the $250K that you've given me. Do you find it hard having to be the VC where you're like, you've saved $200K for me, but I need $1 million now? You have a fund, you have ownership goals, you have to hit them.
Yeah, to be honest, I do worry about that sometimes. But I think it comes back to you just can't be anyone other than who you are. I like to think I'm a nice person, and I would have a really hard time being a different way. And rather than trying to be different, I think you have to win on who you are and how you can help. And so, I'd like to think that I pride myself in working really hard for the companies that we invest in. And if I can bring the value that I can bring and I'll work really hard for you, then like you're going to want to do the right thing. And you're also going to want us in future rounds. Like that's going to compound over time. And in future rounds, we're going to be able to put even more in because we've been helpful and because we're a group that you love to work with, which may be different than getting more in the first round and then, poisoning a relationship, which hurts you both with that company and with every company that person would then refer potentially. So I think the right things happen over the long run, and I try and fight in the way that makes sense for me to fight, and then just do my best and work hard for people.
You mentioned Whatnot as a massive hit. I actually had Grant on the show. Fantastic guy. Misses. We always learn from our misses too. What's been the biggest miss, and what did you learn from that?
So, I mean, I won't name names, but there are a couple companies that I chose not to invest in because they were founded by people whose work that that I worked with and for whatever reason in that environment weren't amazing. And so I made the assumption that was them, not some combination or interplay between them and the environment that they were in. And I didn't invest, and they went on to do amazing things. And it's just been a reminder to me that it isn't just the people, it's also the setting matters. And some people, like as you said about 0 to 1 people or whatever, sort of perfecting something that exists kind of people, you can be not great in one environment and then go shine in another environment. And so I always try and sort of reset my slate when I talk to people.
My biggest miss is I did a reference and they said they were terrible at the company and useless
Right.
and disruptive. And yeah, they were useless and disruptive, but they hated working in a team with an arsehole leader. And so
Right.
that's
And it
why
turns out
big
they're a
miss.
great founder. Yeah.
Amazing founder. Yeah, missed that one. Fuck. Anyway, I want to move into a quick fire round, Kevin. So I say a short statement and you give me your immediate thoughts. Does that sound okay?
Yeah, let's do it.
So you run like insane amounts, sometimes 100-mile races. When the running kind of wall hits and you just feel you can't do any more, what do you say to yourself? What is that mind talk?
I try and always remind myself that it's how you feel in a race, especially a long one, is kind of a sinusoid. Like you're going to have moments that are good and moments that are bad, but because you felt good an hour ago and you feel bad now doesn't mean you're going to feel worse in 2 hours. What you actually need to do, you're probably dehydrated a little bit or you need food. And if you take care of what you need to right now, you grind through it, and 20 minutes from now, you're going to feel better. And you have to tell yourself that because you're naturally going to be like, oh, I'm going to feel worse in an hour. This is terrible. You don't let yourself get into that mindset. You actually can do some things, you make it better, and then you grind through it. And I think that has applications in running and probably also in life and in work.
What changes have you made in your athletics, or running, cycling, that have made the biggest differences? Be it diet, be it training, be it equipment?
Probably just consistency, to be honest. I think people move from fad to fad, and whether it's diet or training or whatever, and it's actually just getting up and doing it every day actually matters a ton. I try and kind of always keep myself in a place where if a friend has like a stupid idea for a crazy race that we should go run, that I can kind of drop everything and go do it and not be like, oh, well, I haven't been training as much, so give me 2 months.
What's your training routine?
I will go, let's see, I don't miss a day. Um, so I probably haven't missed a day in years. I tend to work out for an hour or two a day. Either I'll go run 10 or 12 miles, or I'll be on my bike and trainer, try and do some weights. But like whatever it is, I'm anal about this. I like will do it every day, for better or worse.
I love that. That's hilarious. I think you missed the school of thought that said rest days was an important part of it.
Yeah, well, it's you modulate, right? I don't go hard every day. I'll have days where I feel easy. I kind of listen to my body more than I follow any particular training plan. So if I'm not feeling great, I'll ride my bike instead of run, and that gives my knees a break. Yeah, so I try and listen to my body, but I'm always doing something.
How many calories do you eat a day, Kevin?
I don't know, a lot.
A lot.
A lot. I try and eat healthy, but I eat a lot of volume.
I can't remember who it was who told me. They were like, "Don't see a hangry Kevin." That was one last thing.
Maybe my wife.
You know what it wasn't? It was someone who worked with you. Okay, who's the best board member that you've worked with and why?
I'll give you three, actually. Peter Fenton, David Rosenblatt, and Carl Bass. Peter and David
Why?
were on our board at Twitter. Carl's on the board at Planet. Because every single one of them, they are available whenever you need them. They're dedicated. They're just like, tell me how I can help. All three of them are people that I would call when I had a problem, and I felt like I could call them. And when I called them, it wasn't an inconvenience. They were just like, all right, let me know what I can do to help. And they were all like uniformly valuable whenever you need them.
What would you most like to change about the world of venture?
Less hype, more hard work for founders. I think the industry's kind of 50-50 there. Some people are in like hustling every single day for the right things and helping their portfolio companies, and others are not.
Which product leader do you most admire and respect?
I have been so lucky in my career, across folks like Kevin Systrom, Jack Dorsey, etc. David Marcus, who was my boss in my previous role, was incredibly well-rounded. Like, he was the thing I really learned from him. He was a great product leader. His instincts were really good, but he also really trusted his team. And so he would step back and he would give us a lot of room to execute. And he built a great team around himself. And then when something wasn't going right, he wasn't afraid to dive in. And when he dove in, his instincts are really good. But in most cases, he would just sort of set a direction and let us operate. And that's been something I've really tried to take forward myself.
Kevin, you run 100-mile races. You have 3 wonderful kids. You work at Planet. You work with Scribble. Literally, how do you actually do it?
My wife would be the first person to tell you I do not have it figured out. I mean, I'm usually up at 5 to get a workout in, take the kids to school, play with them in the mornings, work, come back home, see Elizabeth, see the kids, and then usually get back on and do some more work. So I guess I sacrifice sleep, which is getting harder and harder as I get older.
What time do you go to bed?
Midnight, 1 a.m. Except for Tuesdays, we try and have date night on Tuesdays, and Elizabeth and I try to be religious about it. We're not perfect, but we try to be religious about it. And it's like the one night where we, go to a movie, go to dinner, go on a bike ride, kind of whatever. And I really try hard not to work in that evening, and that's a really nice thing. So that's been like one of the things we've tried that's really worked. But I do not have it figured out.
Do you worry about the 4 hours sleep?
Yeah, totally. I think it's probably not good for me, and I am trying to get better, trying to get more efficient faster than I take on new things. And that means also for me learning to say no, which I'm not good at.
Penultimate one. If I could remove one recurring thing from your calendar, what would I remove?
Oh, that's a great question. That is a great question. Gosh, I don't know. I mean, I like to think I really with kids and work and all this other stuff, I really actually try hard to not have recurring things on the calendar that aren't useful. I work with my assistant who's unbelievable, and we do a calendar audit pretty regularly to say is all this stuff really valuable? Do we really need it? I'll have to give that one more thought because I'm sure there's stuff on there, but I really try hard not to do it because I have no free time.
I love that question. You should be on more boards. Trust me, there's something I want to be off. Final one. What's the most recent publicly announced investment, and why did you say yes and get so excited with Scribble?
Yeah, it's a company called Fig. And what they're doing is reimagining the terminal experience. So if you're a developer, you spend a lot of your time in the terminal, like in the shell. And they're basically building all kinds of new features into the shell. The shell hasn't changed since 1969 with the original Unix shell. And they're building autocomplete, and they're making it a platform and doing all this cool stuff. They're doing it in an open source way. I really have enjoyed working with the founders and getting to know them. We actually originally made an angel investment in Fig pre-Scribble, and then followed up with a bigger investment from Scribble. And they're super customer focused. They're innovative. They're not afraid to try new things. But every bit that they do, they're engaging with their community and building what their community wants. I've loved watching that feedback over time. So I'm excited about where they go.
Kevin, I've loved this. We've taken it in many different directions, from calories and sleep to lessons from Instagram and Twitter and investing. So thank you so much for the broad conversation, and I absolutely loved it.
Thank you so much for having me.